Over the last few months, Lex Luthor has had his picture taken more times, far more times than in all of his previous life. But while surely that's a good thing, since it means his political career is flourishing, still Lex feels cold dread whenever someone points a camera at him. For the split second he's blinded by the flash, he has to quash an imperative instinct to cut and run. No matter who he is now, and he's worked hard to create himself, to build formidable identities both public and secret, at base he remains his father's son. And his father killed a man, then lived the rest of his miserable existence as a fugitive in constant fear of being recognized, seized, and punished. Once when the family, calling itself the Littles that year, was living in Ashland, Virginia, and Lex was 11, a photographer snapped a picture of him parading on stilts at the town's July 4th picnic. Next morning, it appeared on the front page of the daily newspaper, and there for all to see was Lex's father, cringing in the background, one hand flung up to conceal his face. God, that look of sheer terror. Lex never forgot it. Or forgave it either. Now, decades later, after Willie Bird leapt out of nowhere and clicked a jeopardizing picture of him, of Alderman Lex Luthor standing in a bookie joint with 2 known criminals and 5 murdered men, Lex wonders if his face looked as stricken as his father's had on that Independence Day. With every fiber of his being, he hopes not.
Find that man and make sure that film is never developed.
We'll find him.
Yes, Polly, we will.
I don't know how he got in.
But we certainly know how he got out, don't we?
Well, I thought Stick closed the door.
Hey, you came in last. You should have closed it.
Shut up, the both of you. And take a left here, Polly, at 38th.
But how you figure you go east, boss? He's some kind of news hawk, right? So the closest paper would be the Times or the HT, and they're a couple of blocks up.
He's a tabloid rat, Polly. He'll head for the Mirror or the Daily News, east.
But why do you think he took 38th?
Because 37th is closest, and he'd expect us to think he took it.
Well, how do you know he's on foot?
I don't. I'm hoping. And for your sake, Polly, you'd better hope I'm right.
I thought I closed it, boss. It must have stuck.
Just drive and stick when we spot him.
I'm out in a flash, sir. You bet. And I'll get you that camera. No problem.
I expect you to get more than just the camera.
Yes, sir. Goes without saying. That stinking little Hebe is history.
Stick, please. I don't want to hear that kind of name-calling. Polly, speed up a little. I think I see him.
If that picture were ever developed, which it won't be, Lex might look surprised, possibly shocked, but not terrified, not craven, not caught, not him. Never. He's not his father.
Stick, now, go, go!
Be Willie. Hello?
Lois?
Oh, it's you, Skinny. Flat lever.
Cut it out low and listen.
You really left me in a lurch, you know it? Moving in with your hotshot boyfriend. Thank you so very much.
Lois! Willie's been shot. They just brought him in.
What are you talking about, in? In where? What are you saying?
I'm saying, Lois, that somebody shot Willie and they just brought him into Roosevelt. I'll meet you down in emergency.
Skinny? That's not funny. Skinny!
Seated in the rear of a gray Lincoln Town car, parked with a motor running on West 37th Street, Lex Luthor idly jiggles a roll of 12-exposure Kodak film in his left palm while observing a large-bellied cop at the 7th Avenue corner smoking a cigarette. Lex hates smoking, detests the habit. First thing, soon as he's the mayor, it becomes a felony. Smoking becomes a Class A felony. You get caught with those things, expect to do some hard time. Or maybe he'll have to wait till he's governor, or president, or king. But you smokers, all you nicotine fiends, your day is coming. Gum chewers too. Hooking 3 fingers around the edge of the film container, he pulls, first bending, then cracking the metal. He tears out the sprocketed acetate, then he lights it with a match and tosses it through the open curbside window, watches it burn in the gutter. A panel truck with its headlights off noses slowly from the alley just ahead, but stops before it rolls into 37th Street. That would be all the punch boards, the slot and pinball machines. The driver sets the brake. Polly gets out of the cab's passenger door and walks over to the big Lincoln and smiles down at the still-burning tangle of film.
All set, boss. Dane's brother's in the back with the stuff, and that's Frank Robble at the wheel.
All right, here's what you do. Tell Frank to go up to Inwood without you, and remind him what I said about checking before just walking in there.
Yeah, I'll do that, boss.
Mr. Luciano might not be entirely finished with his little games tonight.
Is that who we're dealing with?
It's who I'm dealing with, Paulie. You're dealing with me.
Sure, boss.
What about the second part of the effort?
Boss?
The bodies?
Oh, just finishing up.
Who's driving?
Stan Elder.
Make sure he knows he's driving upstate.
Or Jersey, you said.
Or Jersey. And tell him to call the police from a payphone just before he leaves the city.
Well, why would he do that?
Because he's a good citizen. Because he saw something suspicious going on here and he wants the cops should take a look. Make sure he knows the address.
No such person as Lex Luthor was in the public record anywhere prior to September 1923. Before that, he was serially Alexander Bankton, Clay Alexander Plenty, Douglas Alexander Little, Alexander Todd Biggs, then Lex Robbins, then, following the death of his father, Luther Dunn, Dunn being his mother's maiden name, and finally, Lex, no middle name, Luthor. When he registered at City College's School of Civic Administration and Business, it was the first time he'd ever used the name or dashed off the signature. His high school transcripts were impeccably bogus, and with the exceptions of his height and weight and his address at the time, he'd taken a small apartment on 15th Street near Union Square. Every piece of documentation, and each filled in line of every standardized form, was a carefully considered, always plausible lie. He even claimed to be 20, when in fact he was 18. His father may have been a gross disappointment, foolish and finally unmanned, but by example he had taught Lex both the rudiments and the nuances of creating, maintaining, and if necessary, sloughing off full-blown counterfeit identities. He, or rather the last 15 years of his poisoned fugitive life, also had taught Lex that violence without ruthlessness only made you vulnerable and weak, left you defenseless against self-contempt. How could the dark-eyed gambler whose photographs Lex once discovered buried in a steamer trunk have turned into the chain-smoking, gum-chewing grocery clerk, factory hand, short-order cook who sneered at him, resented him, and probably would have beaten him 3 times to the month if his mother had not always intervened? Yet the man Lex Luthor has become, is still becoming, that man, he has often mused, is undeniably the offspring of Wesley Bankton, who once cut a dashing, aggressive figure, taking options on thousands of acres in the Middle West, establishing towns, Wesley, Iowa, Bankton, Missouri, Wesdale, Nebraska, and serving as mayor of each one, at least till it failed, or he grew bored, or in the case of Wesdale, he fled under cover of the night. 1,000 times during his childhood, Lex heard about Gorseline Easy, a wild-eyed holy roller who owned less than 50 acres planted in corn, a nobody, a shabby drawling down and outer with a raw-boned, homely wife. Gorseline Easy. Gorseline. What kind of name was that? And what kind of fool was he to imagine he could win an election against Wesley Bankton? Not only that, what kind of imbecile was this corn farmer to think he could publicly accuse Wes Bankton of looting the town's treasury and get away with it? On the 9th of September, 1908, Wesley Bankton found this stupid nobody at work in his smokehouse and shot him dead. That was all well and good. Lex Luthor would have done the same thing. But then his father hastened away in darkness with his imperious wife and their 3-year-old red-headed boy, and was ruined forever. It was not doing murder that changed him, unmanned him. It was the crushing fear that followed. Fear of capture, trial, humiliation, imprisonment, execution. Fear was what a man could least afford. That was the only useful lesson that Lex ever learned from his father, the father he knew as Dick Plenty, Jerome Little, John Biggs. A father whose memory continues to fill Lex Luthor with disgust. Betty Simon, the girl all the boys call Skinny because she is anything but, meets Lois Lane just inside the entrance to the emergency room. Taking her by a wrist, she leads her to a row of chairs. Nearby, a deli man in a grimy apron hunches over, cradling a hand wrapped with a bloody towel. Despite his misery, he is unable to conquer the temptation to give a side glance at Skinny. Now that's a nurse, he thinks.
Sit, Lois.
But what are they saying?
He's still in surgery.
So why aren't you there?
Because I'm not. Sit. Do you want some coffee?
No, I don't want any coffee. Where did this happen?
I'm not sure. Somewhere on the east side. Had you seen him tonight?
We had a big, stupid fight.
Listen, why don't I go check? See what I can find out?
The deli man lifts his eyes again to watch Skinny Simon leave, But when Lewis glowers at him, abashed, he looks back down at his bundled-up hand. Lewis begins to stride up and down the waiting room. But then she spots a cop outside speaking with a group of men who are obviously reporters. Lewis comes through the heavy glass door to the ambulance bay.
Not too far from one of them university clubs, but nobody's seen anything is what I'm told. And I don't know which club.
We heard his camera got smashed, that's all?
Well, I can set you fellas straight about that. I wouldn't say it was smashed. More like it just fell and broke when the poor lad got in the back.
Lois feels a cold pain move in her chest, crawling up from her sternum to the lower part of her throat.
But you birds might like this. Seems our trigger man helped himself to the film.
Any idea what was on it, Danny?
Nope. You?
Where was he coming from?
Beats me.
What's this about a set of burglar's pics?
Where'd you hear that?
So what about it? Will he have them or not?
No comment.
Danny, what do you know about this stiff they just found in a pawn shop with his throat cut? That's only a couple of blocks from where little Willie got shot. Any connection?
No comment. Yes, ma'am. You.
The cop nods at Lois, who by now has dug out her own pencil and nickel pad from her purse and pushed rudely through the pack of newshounds.
So what are the doctors saying about his chances? This Joe gonna make it?
On Tuesday, the 18th of June, Willie Berg finally opens his eyes again, only to be told that a bill of indictment was handed down yesterday in the city and county of New York, charging him with first-degree murder in the death of Leon Seymour Chodesh, murder during the commission of an armed robbery. There is the little matter of a claim ticket from the victim's place of business, discovered in Willie's billfold, plus that kit of flagrantly illegal jimmies and picks stuffed in his jacket, his fingerprints on the cash register, the counter, the telephone. And if he wasn't stitched up and so full of drains, the two homicide detectives that arrest Willie in his hospital bed would show him exactly what they think of his cockamamie story about a bookmaker's parlor, a bunch of dead bodies. Only 5? Why not 10, Willie? Or 20? And the secret criminal career of Alderman Lex Luthor, the newest, youngest, and most popular member of the board.
So who shot you, Willie? You have a little falling out with your accomplice? You didn't want to split the take?
What take?
Who shot you, kid?
I told you!
Yeah.
Go to hell.
You're the one who's gonna have a hot date with the electric chair.
That same day, Willie's picture runs on the front page of all of the 2, 3, and 5-cent papers. Both the News and the Mirror refer to him as a mad dog killer. But that doesn't bother him half as much as what the Planet calls him, a would-be photographer. Now that hurts. Funeral services for Martha Clark Kent are scheduled for 10 a.m. this morning at the Tomahawk Methodist Church, corner of 4th and Union Streets, Smallville, Kansas. Dr. Thomas B. Callis will officiate. Clark, however, isn't sure his father plans to attend the service at the Methodist Church. For Mr. Kent, it was the last straw when that supercilious prig Tom Callis told the Chippewa handyman Dan Toy that while he could maintain, at a salary too low to be called even a pittance, the church building and cemetery grounds all week long, he and his family could not worship with the congregation on Sunday. They were not welcome. Mr. Kent never again set foot in the Tomahawk Methodist Church. Naturally, he wished Martha had joined him in his boycott, but he recognized that he'd put her in a difficult position. After all, it was her grandfather, R.H. Clark, who'd founded the church back in 1879 when the original town site was plotted out. So Martha continued to attend services, though sporadically, until her illness. Clark usually went with her. And now, on the morning of her funeral, Clark suspects that he might be going into town alone. But just before 9 o'clock, his father appears in the kitchen, wearing his black Sears and Roebuck suit and shoes. They embrace without a word. They set off together in the slat-sided Ford pickup truck. Mr. Kent is the driving, of course.
Will you be saying any piece this morning?
No, I didn't think I would. Will you?
No. I liked what you wrote about your mother in the paper, son. That was good.
Thank you.
But it was 87, not 88, when she came back from Dakota Territory with her little sister and a paw.
Mom told me 88.
Trust me, Clark. It was 1887. How come you didn't let me have a look at it before you sent that in?
I guess I forgot. I'm sorry, Dad.
They're in town now, coming up Union Street, half a block from the church, the cemetery with its small obelisks and listing headstones behind a black iron fence.
Clark?
Yes, sir?
I was wondering why you put it in there that you're our adopted son.
Because I am.
It never mattered.
I know that.
She loved you like you were her own flesh and blood.
I know.
And you know, I do too. Don't you?
Yes, sir.
It was a fine piece of writing, son. I sure couldn't have done it.
She cherished her family and baked the world's most delicious rhubarb pie. And her apple pie, too. The way she coated the crust with sugar, that you couldn't beat.
Mr. Kent doesn't think he can stand too much more. Martha was all that everyone said, but she was also his wife of 31 years, his best friend, his soulmate, his complement. And she's 5 feet away from him now, confined forever in the plain wooden coffin she requested. And his heart is broken. Rhubarb pies? That woman made the sun come up. And he wants this ordeal to end, to go home, to be home, back in the house where her spirit is still present, will always be present. He wants to go home with his son and grieve. To Mr. Kent's right, Clark sits hunched forward with his head bowed and his eyes closed. His knees are spread apart, and he's gripped the edge of the pew seat. Branching veins have risen on the backs of his hands.
I can tell you.
When Jonathan Kent turns his head, his glance instinctively dropping, he sees, in the foot-wide gap between his son's curled hands, a split opening, breaching in the varnished oakwood edging of their pew. He touches Clark's left elbow. Clark's eyelids snap open. He flinches, jerks backward, and... Aghast, Clark looks at the piece of broken wood in his hands, then blushes furiously as though discovering himself naked in public. Calmly, Mr. Kent takes the wood chunk, leans down, and sets it on the floor under the pew. Behind them, Mr. Kent is well aware the 50 or so congregants, town friends, and neighboring farmers are still looking, still craning, still wondering, what in God's name just happened? It's time, he decides.
Martha, stay close. I need you.
Clark looks around unhappily, back toward the church where 2 women, Mrs. Cackle and Mrs. Kemp, have come outside from what parishioners call the confraternity room, and where, an hour now since the interment, a solemn repast is still in progress. Mrs. Cackle lifts an arm and beckons.
Y'all should come in now.
They want us to come in.
I know it, but I don't think they'll raise a fuss if we don't, do you?
Jonathan Kent slips into a trance of concentration, staring at the mound of rich brown earth in front of him. Then he shifts his eyes to Clark.
Take a walk with me. I want to show you something.
What?
You'll find out.
They leave the cemetery by a gate, and where a small fieldstone building is filled with the implements of grave digging. Dan Toy, a large man of 60 with long, swept-back gray hair and ropey, powerful arms, stands in the doorway as they pass by. They walk down Union Street to Main, turn east there, and continue on. It is a warm summer morning, overcast and humid. On both sides of the exceptionally wide street, automobiles are parked diagonally against the high curbs. Mr. Bleacher is out sweeping the sidewalk in front of his dry goods store. Where the Swede's Bakery used to be, the plate windows are soaked over on the inside, swirling around a square yellow sign that reads, "For Rent." Idly, Mr. Kent wonders whatever became of the Swede, whose name he can't recall now. He was Norwegian, really, but everyone just called him the Swede. Is he still in town? Maybe not. There are several more vacant storefronts, the radio repair, a lunchroom, even the shoe and boot repair, all of them gone. Up ahead, Joe Diver, manager of the Jewel Theater, stands on a ladder affixing big letters to the bulb-ringed marquee. So far it reads, Bride of Fran. Both Clark and Mr. Kent give wide berth to that ladder.
Mr. Kent, Clark, my condolences on your loss.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Mr. Diver.
Half a block on, Mr. Kent gestures to a pressed metal sign jutting out over the sidewalk. Smallville Herald Progress.
I had an interesting talk with Newell Timmons the other week. He came out to the house to see your mom.
Mr. Timmons did? Where was I?
Taking your examinations, I guess. He was saying how he thinks you're a pretty good writer.
Told me I was fair.
He said he talked to you about doing some reporting for his paper.
Yeah, he did.
I'm proud of you, Clark. I think your mom would have got a big kick from your display of enterprise.
He only wants me for maybe a day a week. I can still work on the farm.
I'm pleased.
Are you?
We'll manage.
Be only a day or 2 a week, maybe 3. But I'll still work on the farm.
We'll manage.
By now they've arrived at the daftly grand Town Hall, a marble and copper faux chateau built 30 years ago when Smallville had aspirations to being declared the county seat. With its vaulted ceiling, cavernous gloom, the place puts Clark in mind of some ancient European library, where never in a million years would he feel welcome. Mr. Kent starts up the central staircase. Clark hesitates a moment, then goes up too. In between the offices of the assayer and the town clerk, and set flush against the left-hand wall, are several long glass-topped display cases containing photographs of the first few clapboard buildings on Main Street, some arrowheads, and the yellowed front pages of old newspapers describing historic floods and locust infestations, as well as celebrated crimes. There is a Kansas state flag the size of Clark's thumbnail made from dyed kernels of rice by Mrs. Letty Segar, wife of Dr. L. Kipling Segar, and a jagged but vaguely fin or rudder-shaped fragment of burnished green metal about the length of a man's foot, but just an inch or so thick.
There.
Mr. Kent points at the chunk of green metal. Clark notices the hand-lettered card placed nearby, identifies this particular exhibit.
The mystery alloy, which dropped from the sky on June 5, 1917, landing on the property owned by Millard Ike Cahill. Later, metallurgic scrutiny failed to discern its compositional properties. That's what you wanted to show me?
That's it.
What am I supposed to see?
All that's left of your wagon, son.
My wagon?
The one you fell off, before your mother and me found you in the road.
The Kents didn't find him in the road, of course. But in truth, it wasn't too far from the road, a few hundred yards.
Right about there, Clark, or maybe...
Pushing through cornstalks, Mr. Kent squints for a moment.
No, right about there.
Clark trumps by, turning in circles, peering down, searching for what exactly?
But the thing itself, that hit down quite a ways over there.
When Mr. Kent stretches out his right arm, Clark eagerly sights along where his finger points.
Who saw it first?
Your ma. I heard it, but she saw it coming in from up above.
From which direction?
That's my boy.
What?
The reporter. From which direction?
Jonathan turns all the way around.
From behind the house to the front. So most likely from the southeast. And that's an excellent question, Clark, because your mom and I both wanted to get it straight. For when we talked to the Army, or whoever came.
The Army?
The war was on, Clark. We thought it was a bomb from a Zeppelin or some kind of airship. What else would we think?
A bomb?
Well, that's what it looked like, Clark. When we ran out here and saw it, the pair of us figured we were seeing the biggest, fattest bomb in the Kaiser's arsenal. Then we just jackrabbited back this way, thinking we'd been lucky so far, but any second it was bound to blow up. And that's how we happened to find you, naked as a jaybird. I nearly ran right over you.
Clark opens his mouth but just keeps looking there, then over there, then back to the house, then over its roof to the southwest.
Let's go inside. Hot as it is, I could use a cup of coffee.
So that piece of metal you showed me is all that's left?
I never found anything more. After it blew up, it was gone, except for the chunk that fell on Ike Cahill's barn. I guess not on the barn, but pretty darn close.
Who's Ike Cahill?
Oh, he's long dead. He used to own what's Curin Hurley's now.
The cannery? That's 10 miles from here.
Or more.
Clark spoons sugar into his coffee and stirs.
So that's how come my birthday's June 5th?
That's how come. Though your mom said you looked at least 8 months old, and the doctor in Tabor Lodge said you looked to be about a year. Of course, he also said you had the strength of a 5-year-old. And the coordination, too. You grabbed hold of his eyeglasses and crumpled them.
Saying that, Mr. Kent is reminded of his own glasses, which he removes and cleans with a napkin.
By Tabor Lodge, you mean...
The orphanage there, yes.
I really broke his glasses?
Well, that was the least of it. You were a holy terror. They'd put you in a crib and find you next morning 2 floors below in some classroom, eating chalk.
Really? Chalk?
Oh, and your mother heard this one from the nurses. The superintendent never told us about it, but supposedly you climbed some drapes and had yourself a grand old time hanging from the rod like Cheetah the chimpanzee. And when nobody climbed up to get you, you let go.
And?
Clark.
Right, and nothing.
They started calling you the super baby. Pass the milk, please and thank you.
But Dad...
Why didn't we tell anybody?
No. Well... Yes, but...
Where did we think you came from? Well, after we decided you weren't part of a German bomb, since we figured no matter how savage we'd heard those Huns were, they weren't bad enough to bomb us with babies.
Or dumb enough.
So we figured it was some kind of an airship, although Martha, your mom, called it your cradle.
My cradle?
Well, the truth? We thought somebody shot you off from someplace in Europe or South America or like Kitty Hawk, and we expected to read about it next day in the paper.
But why would anybody put a baby inside an airship?
Well, that's what we wanted to know.
Holding his cup with both hands, Clark stares dreamily at the coffee.
Clark, it took us maybe 30 seconds to decide that you were ours, that you'd been given to us. That's the first thing. We'd never been blessed with children. I was almost 52, and your mother was, a little younger. And some things, it gets too late to happen. But here was this gift. Here was you. So that's the first thing you should know. We adopted you before we took you to any orphanage. As soon as we found you, that was it. You were our son.
Then why did you take me to the orphanage?
Well, pretty hard to explain you at our ages, son. So we left you at the doorstep, like in one of those cartoons you see. And so what? We always intended to come back, and we did.
You don't know who my people are, or where I come from. I'm all alone.
Of course you're not alone. How could you ever think such a thing?
Easy. You try coming from another planet.
Clark, for goodness sake, you read too many of those magazines.
It was a rocket, Dad.
It was an airship.
Okay, where from?
Well,
Dad?
You're not from outer space. You'd have 4 tentacles and a nose like, I don't know what, a horn.
I need to go out for a while.
Running to the furthest field that marked the edge of the Kent's farm, Clark stands in high blue-stem grass with a light breeze carrying a scent of hay across the meadow and looks south, beyond the big pasture, the calf pasture, the broomcorn, the barn, back to his house, bathed in the milky light of a near full moon. He puts back his head, breathes in, and looks up at the stars.
I watched Stick fire 3 shots into that sneaky little weasel, into his back. How could he have survived? And now, according to the papers, he's expected to make a full recovery.
Boss, it's gonna be fine. The cops like the kid for Leon's murder. They ain't even looking anywhere else. The one concern is what happens when he comes off the dope and starts to talk. Things might change in a hurry.
I told you yesterday, Paulie, it's your job to make certain he never comes off the dope. Why do I have to repeat myself?
Well, I keep trying, boss. But there's always someone with him. If it's not his skinny girlfriend, it's some blonde nurse with a Jean Harlow chassis times 10. And now there's an armed bull posted outside his door around the clock.
Lex has considerable sway with the New York City Police Department, and in ordinary circumstances it would be simple enough to scrounge up some narcoleptic potsy and stick him in the hospital midnight to 8, the only time safe to do this thing. But it turns out that a plainclothes dick working out of Headquarters Detective Division down on Center Street, someone named Dick Sandglass, reputedly clean and apparently not a brown nose, either sits guard himself at Willie Berg's door overnight, or else selects others for the job. Lex's hands have begun shaking again. For long periods of time he has to keep them held in his pockets, and he's started to notice that clumps of his hair come out whenever he brushes or combs it.
Calm down. It's going to be all right. It's going to be okay.
But why should he have to worry about this idiot Willie Berg when he has so many other things on his plate? Such as the careful awarding of contracts, easily worth $25 million, for the construction of playgrounds, promenades, and ball fields between the Hudson River and Riverside and Fort Washington parks. Such as the brokering of deals for the expansions of subway trunk lines in Brooklyn and the digging of a new 6th Avenue subway in Manhattan. That construction alone will run in the neighborhood of $60 million. If Lex plays his cards right, cements certain friendships, and eliminates certain gadflies, he can see clear to pocketing 2 or even 3% of the final budget.
So many things to do.
Not the least of which is the destruction of Lucky Luciano's alliances and various enterprises by means both legal and illegal. Everything's going to be all right, he tells himself again. But why has he suddenly started losing his hair?
And why the hell is Dick Sandglass taking such a personal interest in Willie Berg?
I appreciate you coming here like this, Mr. Sandglass.
No problem. I don't know I can really help you, kid, but you were always a good pal to my son, and that's worth something. He never had it easy having a cop for an old man.
And not just a cop, a real Dick Tracy, who never takes so much as a free sinker and a cup of coffee. He's a good guy, though, and when Spider and Willie were young, Dick Sandglass would take them both out to Yankee Stadium 2 or 3 times every season. And on one memorable occasion in 1926 to the World Series. It's how Willie got to see Grover Alexander strike out Tony Lazzeri in the 7th game with bases loaded. As a kid, Willie used to wish that Dick Sandglass was his pop, despite all of Spider's complaints about the old man. A real good guy, Spider's dad. It used to be said the reason his wife left him was because she'd got fed up by his honesty. A bull's wife was expected to own some jewels that weren't paste, a seasonable wardrobe, her own Ford motor car, and a summer cottage in the Catskills.
So, what's Spider doing these days?
3 to 5 in Dannemora. Atrocious assault.
And you couldn't,
I wouldn't.
Oh.
Sandglass sends Willie a look that wipes the hopefulness right off his face. But he reaches a hand out and pats Willie's knee through the bed covers.
Spider's holding his own, like I know you will. I really am sorry you got yourself in such a jam.
You and me both, Mr. Sandglass. And like I said, thanks for coming. Thanks for being here. Those other cops today, jeez, I thought they were going to tear out my stitches and stick their hands in there.
They won't rough you up, Willie, I promise. But they won't lay off either, not till you start telling the truth.
I swear to God, Mr. Sandglass, I am. Why would I make up something like that?
Maybe it was the first dumb thing that popped into your head. You remember when you and Spider got caught roaming around that Catholic school on Thompson Street? You remember what you said?
I was 13.
You said 4 nuns grabbed you and locked you both inside till you promised to convert.
I was 13!
When somebody comes by tomorrow to ask you more questions, tell the truth.
I swear on my sweet mother. It was Lex Luthor.
Please.
Sandglass turns to leave.
And somebody named Paulie and somebody called Stick. The 3 of them. I seen them there, believe me.
Stick? Stikowski? Herman Stikowski?
I don't know any Herman Stikowski. I'm just telling you, Lex Luthor was there. I seen him there, him and a guy called Stick and a guy named Paulie.
You've always been full of it, Willie. But I'll see they treat you right.
I'm telling the truth.
I'll be outside.
What, I'd kill somebody for my lousy camera?
Willie, from what I hear, you'd kill anybody for your lousy camera. Good night.
Happy Independence Day, Mother.
Lex let himself in with his key and finds her alone on the terrace in her unnecessary invalid's chair.
I just had a feeling you'd come by today. Do I get a kiss?
Lex bends down and lightly brushes his lips against her flaccid cheek, then straightens back up with pressed powder and face paint clinging to them like grit and glue. Despite the broiling glare of the midday sun, her apartment's terrace faces west with views of the Palisades, the Hudson, and the high conical roof of Grant's tomb. Lex's mother has on a black woolen dress from Arnold Constable's. Around her shoulders, she's draped a fringed maroon shawl. Her legs are covered with a plaid blanket. She's tucked it snugly around her hips. On a small glass-topped table within easy reach stands a small squat glass filled, Lex knows, with Kentucky bourbon. Beside the glass is a candy dish containing prescription tablets, barbiturates entirely. Around the clock she keeps that dish near to hand, but every time Lex pays her a visit, there are more pills in it. He can't estimate how many there are at the moment, but 50 at least.
Sit down, Alexander. Are your hands shaking?
No, Mother.
They certainly look it. And for heaven's sake, will you please stop humming?
I am not humming, Mother.
You were just humming.
Then I beg your pardon.
Sit, child.
He does, directly across from her. She seems smaller than she did even last week, more wrinkled, more crabbed and forlorn, more deeply deranged.
And I think you're beginning to lose your hair. You should see a doctor, or else shave it all off. You have a nicely shaped skull, which you can be sure you inherited from my side of the family. My dear father had a skull shaped like the world. Excellent, a very excellent skull. He was not, however, bald. None of the men in the Dunn family, to my knowledge, ever were bald. You should do something, Lex. Oh, it looks spotty. How are you coming along with your engineering studies?
I haven't begun them yet, Mother. I haven't had time.
Then see that you make time. You know how I feel. Politics are all well and good, but look where they got your father.
My career is quite different from his.
Let us hope. But the future belongs to the engineers, son.
So you say.
So I know. Oh, do what you like. I won't be around long enough to see what becomes of you anyway.
Mother.
Brows furrowed, he stands up. Just below his diaphragm, his stomach begins to ripple in little fluttering spasms. Bracing both palms on the terrace rail, he looks out over the dark blue Hudson.
I wish you wouldn't talk like that. You're not even 65 years old.
Am too. I'm 70. 71.
Mother. And for all these years, you've been telling me...
Liar, liar, pants on fire.
She leans over the small table, her nose hovering above the glass of bourbon, shifting 6 inches to hover and twitch above the dish of pills.
What shall it be today? Oh, what shall it be?
Must we go through this every time I come?
The bourbon or the barbiturates? Bourbon or barbiturates? Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
I should be going.
But you only just got here.
Have to show my face at a parade or two.
Do you enjoy all that?
No.
Then why?
I have plans, Mother.
And what might those be, Alexander?
I don't think I need to tell you everything I'm doing.
No, you don't need to. But I'd hoped you might want to.
All right, Mother. I've decided to take over all of the criminal rackets in New York City. That's all 5 boroughs. And with the money from that, well, I'm not quite sure yet.
Oh, Alexander, really? I don't find this at all amusing. Now sit down!
He smiles and remains standing.
I'd always thought we had a special bond, you and I. Seeing what we went through together, 15 years of hell. But no matter what, I always had you. And I liked to believe that you had me.
I did. I still do.
But you don't love me. You've never loved me.
Mother, that's not fair.
Fair. Barbiturate or bourbon?
She plucks out a dark green pill from the candy dish.
For God's sake!
Bourbon. I was thinking just earlier today, don't ask me why, but do you recall that pot metal spaceship, that toy I got you once at Woolworth's in Madison, Wisconsin?
Columbus, Ohio. And it wasn't a Woolworth, it was a Kresge's.
You remember it. Red and yellow with tiny little portholes.
Of course.
Do you also remember how I was so despondent one day, feeling so worn out from everything, all the running, and your father was already sick, hardly ever working? Do you remember?
You were always feeling worn out, Mother.
Oh, Alexander, you haven't grown up to be the kindest man, have you?
You were saying?
That I found you on the rug this one day playing with that little spaceship, and I got down there with you. You remember that?
No.
No. Well, I said, honey, wouldn't it be nice if we could both just climb into that spaceship and blast off? Go to another planet, just you and me? Oh, I was sick of everything.
His hands, Lex realizes, are trembling again.
I said, let's just you and me get in your spaceship and blast off. And you said, I'm sorry, Mother, but there is only room for one. I'm sorry, Mother, but there is only room for one. Oh, you really don't remember?
I really don't remember.
Always the solemn little boy.
Practical.
And practical, yes. Well, run along, my solemn and practical little boy. You'll be late for all your picnics and parades. And Alexander, happy Independence Day to you, too.
City prosecutor gets bumped up to crack down on organized crime. Byline, New York, New York, July 15, 1935. Assistant District Attorney Thomas E. Dewey has enthusiastically accepted the appointment by Governor Herbert H. Lehman to the newly created post of Special Deputy Assistant Attorney General. The announcement was made this morning on the steps of the old county courthouse on Chambers Street. Mr. Dewey is now charged with conducting a thorough investigation of citywide vice and racketeering before an extraordinary grand jury. Dewey, known as much for his dashing good looks as his prosecutorial zeal, is expected to bring New York's notorious crime syndicates to their knees. Sources close to the governor say the appointment was made after consultation with Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia, District Attorney William C. Dodge, and freshman New York City Alderman Lex Luthor. Alderman Luthor, who made the defeat of organized crime a cornerstone of his campaign last year, said, "Given the resources available to the Attorney General's office, Tom Dewey should be able to make New York the safest city in America within the next 2 years. He has my full support." Although not mentioned by name, the clear target of the investigation is mob boss Charles Lucky Luciano, the undisputed czar of organized crime.
On Thursday, the 1st of August, Willie Berg is informed that his doctors have deemed him sufficiently recovered to be moved from his bed in Roosevelt Hospital to the hospital ward in one of the new fireproof brick buildings constituting the model penitentiary on Rikers Island. The transfer will take place sometime within the next 24 to 48 hours, once the paperwork is completed.
I'll still try to keep my eye out for you, kid, but it won't be quite so easy from here.
Removing a 3x5 decal-etched photograph from his billfold, Dick Sandglass inches forward in the chair, closer to Willie.
Recognize this guy?
No.
Sandglass sits back, looking disappointed and beginning to put away the snapshot.
Who is it?
I thought you might have told me.
Is that Stick? Is that Herman Stikowski? Let me see it again.
Willie.
I didn't get a good look at the guy's face. I seen his legs.
But on the other hand, you saw Lex Luthor's face clear enough.
I did. And if they hadn't stolen my film, the other two guys would have been in the picture. You would have seen.
According to hospital admitting records, at 3:30 p.m., a male Caucasian, weight 240, height 6 feet 3 inches, date of birth 5/12/95, occupation left blank, is assigned a private room 2 doors down from Willie's. His chart gives his name as Sidney N.M.I. Marsden and claims he is suffering from diverticulosis. He is not. He's in perfect health, although he does remember to groan occasionally, as he's been instructed, and to complain, but not too much, about his discomfort. In between his groaning and his complaining, he entertains himself by reading stories in a year-and-a-half-old issue of Argosy. It's a tribute to his professionalism that he resists ogling and mashing Betty Simon, one of the nurses on duty.
Maron, the lungs on that broad.
His name is not Sidney Marsden. At 6:45, Lois Lane arrives at the hospital. Because her pocketbook holds a little zippered manicure kit containing a metal nail file and cuticle scissors, she has to leave it with a posted guard. This evening, a young blonde-haared policeman in tunic named Ben Yeager. He apologizes when he divests Lois of her bag. She thinks he's cute. 18 months ago, Officer Yeager, still a rookie on traffic detail, arrested Spider Sandglass outside of McSorley's old alehouse, 15 East 7th Street, for assaulting an acquaintance Spider claimed owed him a small amount of money. Clearly, Spider's father doesn't hold that against Officer Yeager. On the contrary. When Lois comes into Willie's room, she discovers him standing at the window, looking down 9 stories to the street.
You shouldn't be out of bed.
They're sending me to Rikers tomorrow.
Get under the covers, please.
I can't go to jail. I'll go nuts.
What about Detective Sandglass? Can't he?
He thinks I'm still lying. Everybody does.
Willie hammers the crown of his head against the window frame.
You don't think I'm lying, do you, Lois?
Willie, I don't think you cut anyone's throat. Of course not.
But?
I think maybe you saw somebody who just looked like the alderman.
I should just stick my tongue in a light socket. Be done with it. Save everybody a lot of trouble.
Willie, you need to calm down. Now listen, I did some calling around today and I think I may have found you a lawyer. His name—
I can't afford a lawyer.
I can help.
Oh, sure, now you can. Now you can loan me some money. Thanks a whole heap.
Don't start.
If you'd loaned me $30 when I asked you for it—
So this is my fault?
I'm scared, Lois.
I know.
She's eager to hug him, but also reluctant. She doesn't want him to cry out in physical pain. But suddenly, Willie hugs her.
It's going to be okay. It's all going to be just fine.
But with the situation the way it looks, Lois has no idea how. At 10 minutes to 11, a tall and buxom middle-aged nurse that Skinny Simon has never seen before briskly passes her by, absorbed, it seems, in making chart notations on the run. For a moment, Skinny considers chasing after the woman to remind her it's against hospital regulations for nurses to wear perfume on the job. She is going off duty, however, and besides, she's not the shift supervisor. So instead, she goes to check on Willie, not knowing what she could say to him. Do you wish someone well when they're heading off to jail? But she needn't have worried. When she peeks in, he's pretending to sleep. An RN can always tell.
Good night, Officer Yeager.
Skinny clocks out, rides an elevator down to the lobby, and leaves the building. Meanwhile, the atrociously perfumed nurse is removing a vacuum thermos filled with strong coffee from a leather bag she stowed in one of the linen closets when she arrived at the hospital. She glances at her wristwatch, which has no second hand. She's anxious to get started, but it's still too early. Another 45 minutes to an hour at least. Replacing the thermos in the bag and the bag at the back of a lower shelf, she closes the closet, looks up the hall at the policeman sitting in his tipped back chair. She hates pretty boys, and then makes herself scarce. The narrow square bar pinned to her uniform reads, Tibble. If anyone happens to ask her, she'll tell them her first name is Rosemary and that it's Mrs. Rosemary Tibble. But she hopes no one asks her. At a few minutes past midnight, now the 2nd of August, Ben Yeager feels the first cricks move through his shoulders and lower back when a nurse appears and offers him coffee.
You're an angel.
Yeager peers above the square yardage of her bosom to her name bar.
Miss Tibble?
Mrs.
Thank you, Mrs. Tibble.
As she unscrews the deep cap from her thermos, he has to turn his head away slightly and squint his eyes. Perfume has that effect on Officer Yeager, causes his eyes to sting and water. Soon, if Nurse Tibble sticks around, he'll be sneezing his head off. But she doesn't. She fills the cap with hot coffee and watches him take an appreciative gulp.
Why don't you just hold on to the thermos? You need it more than I do.
She gives him a motherly pat on his wrist and pads away on her rubber-soled shoes. Past the room where a new patient called Sidney Marsden is getting dressed in the dark. She doesn't notice that his door is closed. It's locked, too. Marsden finishes tying his shoelaces, then goes back to the closet and removes his overnight bag. The bag contains a full set of men's clothes, underwear, trousers, shirt and shoes, everything purchased only yesterday. The size is estimated from newspaper photographs. He rummages past the clothing, feels around, and finds a small bundle, the newspaper wrapping spotted with gun oil. He takes it out and sits it down on a chair. By the radium glow of the bedside clock, he sees that it's 12:30. He was told not before 1, though he's been twiddling his thumbs for going on 10 hours already. But if he rushes and does this thing too soon, he'll get outside and there won't be a car waiting. So he sits down on the side of the bed. By 1:10, Rosemary Tibble is beginning to feel anxious, even though she has been ducking into different rooms and utility closets up and down the 9th floor. Hiding briefly, emerging, then hiding again. She knows, been noticed by some of the other nurses working the shift. She caught 3 of them looking queerly at her. Even worse, a freckle-faced Irish nurse has gone over and started flirting with the baby-faced copper, who hasn't, so far as Rosemary can see, taken even a sip of coffee in the last 20 minutes.
This better happen soon.
She strokes the slit pocket in her uniform skirt and feels the short, loaded syringe there. At the same moment, downtown on West 23rd Street, not far from the Hotel Chelsea, an explosion rips through a 19th century brownstone residence that was converted 5 years ago into a working men's brothel. From the steps of the nearby YMCA, Herman Stokowski, called Stick, watches the fire with a satisfied grin on his face. At 3 minutes past on the 9th floor of Roosevelt Hospital, Officer Ben Yeager slumps to one side and immediately begins screaming. At 5 minutes past the hour, Rosemary Tibble, having consulted a piece of notebook paper scribbled with instructions, flips several toggles on a little wall dingus that looks much like a fuse box. Immediately up and down the 9th floor, paired blue and red bulbs start flashing an emergency sequence.
Now what? What kind of emergency? Everybody, look, check your patients. Let's go check, go.
She watches all of the other nurses respond. They drop everything and rush in a pack towards swinging doors at the opposite end of the hall. At 6 minutes past 1, Mrs. Tibble enters Willie Berg's room. Stopping suddenly, she leans over Willie, who is fast asleep, but whose legs are kicking under the covers. Carefully, she pushes back the left sleeve of his pajama top and pulls out the plunger from her syringe. She feels something cold touch her neck.
Put it down, sweetheart.
Maybe she would have and maybe she wouldn't have, but Sydney Marsden is impatient beyond any further endurance. She crumples, he catches her, and eases her down to the floor. If he didn't think Mrs. Tibble was a real nurse, thus a good egg and deserving of continued life, he surely would have struck her with blows guaranteed to kill.
Wake up. Get dressed.
Marsden tosses Willie the overnight bag.
Who the hell are you?
You want to get out of here?
Yeah, but who?
Then get dressed.
By 1:30, Willie and Marsden are crossing the Brooklyn Bridge. Lex Luthor's trusted right hand, Paulie Scaffa, sat at his boss's kitchen table with his feet up, reading the afternoon edition of the Daily Planet. Front page above the fold was a story about one of Luthor's closest allies getting caught with his hands in the till.
Gas and electric boss cooks books. Byline, New York, New York, August 16th, 1935. Amalgamated Gas and Electric President Howard H. Sloan is being sought for embezzlement of nearly $500,000. Mr. Sloan is accused of paying Fred S. Gropper, Vice President of AG&E, an annual salary of $60,000 and then charging the system's many holding companies an aggregate of $150,000 per annum for their respective shares of Mr. Gropper's services, and then pocketing the $90,000 a year difference. Mr. Sloan's whereabouts are currently unknown. Upon hearing of these revelations, Alderman Alexander Luthor, a personal friend of Sloan's who benefited from the financier's advice and monetary contributions during his recent election campaign, expressed shock and dismay, but gently reminded members of the Fourth Estate that, in America at least, a man is presumed innocent until proven guilty. During his press conference at City Hall, Alderman Luthor was asked by reporters to comment upon his startling new appearance. Running a hand over his recently shaved and polished skull, he laughed and said, "It kind of resembles the world, doesn't it?"
Lex walked into the kitchen in one of his less than friendly moods.
I'm late for a meeting with Fatty Arbuckle.
He was referring to Mayor LaGuardia, a public friend he privately loathes.
You know something, boss? You kind of look like Daddy Warbugs now. Well, especially since you both wear tuxedos.
Mind telling me why you're sitting there reading the comics? Is that what I pay you for?
Just give me something to do, boss. I'll do it.
Find Willie Berg.
Boss, we've looked. He just vanished.
We'll talk more about this tonight. And bring Stick with you when you come back.
Sure, boss. And in the meantime, I'll keep looking for the kid.
You do that.
There is no paper published in Smallville, Kansas on August 16th. The Herald Progress, 8 broadsheet pages in a tombstone format, comes out just once a week. There will be a new edition next Tuesday. In the meantime, most town and farm residents still keep this past Tuesday's edition on hand. They'll wait until the next one is delivered before putting it in the outhouse or using it for peelings. That's because Newell Timmons, at considerable expense, includes on the next to last page of his newspaper a complete 7-day program listing for all of the radio stations you can pick up in southeastern Osage County. In Smallville, Newell Timmons is considered a crackerjack businessman and a genuine public servant, although Jonathan Kent thinks he was a real boob to support Herbert Hoover in the last election. Otherwise, he's a decent enough fellow for a Republican, and he certainly has been good to Clark. He even gives the boy his own byline if something he's written, the story about the 7 Amish families, for example, that just pulled up stakes and moved to Pennsylvania, runs in excess of 2 columns. In the still current number of the Herald Progress, Clark's name appears below, Ewing L. Herbert celebrates 95th birthday. History of basketball to be topic at Esville Study Club, and farm growth since 31 is epic of toil. In addition to reporting those long stories, he contributed several unsigned squibs about a sawmill boiler explosion, the proposed teacher's contract for School District No. 43, and the robbery at a farmers cooperative in Paula, over near the Missouri line, being attributed to members of the Jiggs Mackley gang. The final sentence reminds readers that Jiggs Mackley died right here in Smallville, killed last May by a freakishly ricocheting bullet fired from his own gun. Clark's father scowls over that last item, prior to taking up scissors and cutting it out of the paper. Most of his son's other stories from the current edition, clipped out and neatly trimmed, are spread over the kitchen table, where there is also a jar of mucilage and a scrapbook. Mr. Kent keeps every story Clark writes, even those not amounting to more than public notices. Well, he can't help it. He's proud. And Clark, who claims to be embarrassed by the sheer thoroughness of his dad's new hobby, is deeply touched by his diligence.
I'll be back sometime this afternoon.
Whenever will be fine.
I think I got all my chores done.
I'm sure you did.
But I can help you with the sump later if you like.
Alger and I'll take care of it. You can't do everything, son. Well, maybe you can, but there's no need to. Alger's a good kid.
I'm not saying he's not.
No, I didn't think you are. But don't be jealous of him either, okay?
For almost a month, ever since Mr. Kent learned that Algerly's mother left suddenly for Detroit because her husband had been injured during a strike at the Ford plant, the boy has been helping around the farm 3 days a week, sometimes 4, 5 occasionally.
Dad, come on. Jealous? I just don't... can we afford to pay somebody?
Let me worry about that. So, what's the scoop today?
Big doings. Nellie Coleman is donating her collection of colored postcards to the Smallville Library.
Sounds like a slow news day.
They all are.
Today, universally beloved comedian, radio broadcaster, syndicated columnist, and movie personality, the Cherokee cowboy with a ready wink, Will Rogers, died in a plane crash near Point Barrow, Alaska, along with his friend Wiley Post. After Charles Lindbergh, Post was the country's most famous aviation pioneer. The two friends were on a flight to Russia. No one will soon forget the man who never met a man he didn't like. In sports news, Italy's Primo Camara, who recently lost the world's heavyweight boxing match to American Negro Joe Louis, has had his passport canceled by Achille Strachey, Secretary General of Italy's fascist party. Strachey is quoted as saying, "Camara's showing is a dishonor to fascist sport." And in New York City, for the 5th time in 2 weeks, fire engulfs a house known to be a den of ill repute. All 5 houses were allegedly operated by associates of indicted racketeer Charles Lucky Luciano. Fire marshals say each fire is a clear case of arson. 3 lives have been lost in the fires so far. And the manhunt continues for the so-called photo fugitive William Jacob Berg. Berg, 20, escaped from a guarded room at Roosevelt Hospital just over 2 weeks ago and is wanted for the murder of a New York pawnbroker, Mr.
Lois changes the radio station. She puts a hand to her forehead and slides it across the moisture there. Her blouse clings to her back, and there are embarrassing half-moons of perspiration below her breasts. She desperately wants to take a cold shower, but there is no shower, no tub, in the suffocating little room they've rented in Washington, D.C., where buildings and monuments shimmer like mirages in the swampy heat. And, turning up the heat even higher, Willie and Lois are disagreeing about hair dye.
I'll look ridiculous with blonde hair. You want me to look like Buster Crab?
Believe me, Cookie, nothing's gonna make you look like Buster Crab.
So not blonde. What then? Red? That's it. Willie Berg, the Irishman.
Leprechaun Willie. Maybe we should just shave your head.
Wrong thing to say. New York dailies are scattered around the room, on the table, the floor, the narrow studio couch where they slept last night. In the Mirror, the Post, and the Planet, there are pictures of the newly bald and lustrous-pated Lex Luthor.
I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking.
Willie twists open the cold water tap on the tiny sink basin. He splashes some on his face, then slicks back his hair. Lifting his eyes, he peers into the shaving mirror.
Maybe I should just get some hair cream, go for that Valentino look. Nobody will recognize me then.
You really want to do it red?
I don't care, I don't care, I don't care!
He throws himself down on the couch.
I'm dead anyway.
Cut it out. You're luckier than you know.
Oh yeah? How you figure that?
Right now, you should be sitting in a cell on Rikers Island. Or did you forget? Or lying on the bottom of the river with 2 buckets of cement on your feet.
They weren't ever gonna dump me, they liked me.
The driver of the Dodge sedan that took Willie Berg through Manhattan and across the Brooklyn Bridge was named, or called, Dakota.
Like the States.
He actually reached back to shake Willie's hand while they were stopped for a light.
And I'm Carol.
This was from the man who'd snatched Willie from Roosevelt Hospital. It sounded like a girl's name, unless it was spelled Carroll and was his last name. Willie didn't feel he should ask.
Dakota, you think we should stop and put a blindfold on this bird?
Should we? I don't know.
If you want, I'll close my eyes.
What do you think, Carol?
All right, kid. Close your eyes.
Willie closed them, kept them closed, and they rolled through the streets of Red Hook. The car finally stopped. Dakota helped Willie from the back. Then he and Carol walked him to a door. But somebody else opened from inside. They brought him to a room and said he could open his eyes. The third man, the man who'd let them all in, was small and fat, with sparse, sand-colored hair combed in strings across the top of his head. There was a card table and several chairs. That was all.
You're gonna wait here.
Willie nodded at Dakota. The three men went out and locked the door. Willie sat down, bewildered, elated, terrified. He had no idea what time it was. Did it really matter? He was running a low fever. Meyer Lansky walked in with Joe Adonis and Benny Siegel. Meyer removed his Homburg, placed it on the table, and sat down at the card table. The other two stood. Meyer Lansky was short and coarse-featured, but unlike his companions, whose eyes stayed frosty even when they smiled, even when they laughed, he could express amusement with his whole face, lips, eyes, nostrils, and Willie felt that it was genuine, that here was a guy who could enjoy himself and didn't believe you had to be sour to be a good mobster.
Can I get you something to drink?
No, thank you. Mr. Lansky.
So, introductions are not in order. You know my associates?
Not personally.
We've heard some things you've been saying, supposedly saying, and thought we should hear them confirmed or denied directly by you. That's why you're here.
Yes, sir.
Do you know which things I'm talking about?
Willie was in a panic now. Was Meyer Lansky hooked up with Lex Luthor? Was that it? Had Lansky heard about the story Willie told the cops? Oh, God. He didn't want to be shot again.
I didn't kill Leon Chodash, if that's what you mean.
I know you didn't kill Leon Chodash, Mr. Berg. He did.
Joe Adonis, a thick, sloppy-fleshed man in an exorbitant gray silk suit that glimmered when he moved, raised a hand, doing it in a comic manner, like a schoolchild who knew the answer to a question.
We're only interested in who you saw in the basement of Mr. Chodash's establishment.
I saw 3 men.
Okay, if you think you're being coy, we'll be glad to show you that that's not the thing to be.
I'm not coy. I'm scared.
No need. Lex Luthor.
Yes.
Yes?
He was there.
You saw him?
I took his picture. That's why they came after me.
And this picture is gone?
I wouldn't be in this mess if it wasn't.
None of us would, Mr. Berg.
It's incredible. Just incredible.
What is?
That they didn't even know who their rival was.
Yeah, until I showed up. Yeah, it is. When are you meeting this guy?
5.
Trust him?
Lois slips into a clean blouse. Buttoning it up, she turns around to Willie.
I can handle John Gurney.
You ever put the moves on you?
He was my college professor.
Willie watches her sit down and roll on and secure her nylon hosiery.
How do I look?
Too good.
Thank you. I still have time.
For what?
He walks up behind her and puts his arms around her middle, his cheek to hers, and clinches hard.
I'm glad you're all recovered, but don't you dare.
Lois pushes Willie away gently. She takes a seat on the sofa and pats a place beside her. As soon as he joins her, she touches his face.
Willie?
Yeah?
Willie nuzzles her hand, enjoying the touch.
Do you think Meyer Lansky and those others will try to kill the alderman?
Why not? But who knows?
You must have heard them talk.
Not really. Maya came back only once. The very next day with Mr. Luciano and,
Mr. Luciano?
Politest guy you ever heard. Makes Amy Vanderbilt sound like Tugboat Annie.
He came with Meyer Lansky and...
I told him the same story. And let me tell you, Mr. Luciano forgot his good manners for a minute there.
But you didn't hear them say what they might do?
Sweetie, they weren't about to make their plans in front of me. They shipped me off to a clinic to heal up, and then they dropped me in downtown Jersey City. You know the rest. I wandered around collecting pop bottles for the deposits. When I had 5, I cashed them in and used the dime to call you. Better get moving. It's 4:20.
Wish me luck.
You think this guy'll go for it?
I have no idea.
Willie then unfurls the turban in front of the little mirror. Touching his still damp hair, he cocks his head to the left and then to the right.
Arrgh! Willie the Red.